I did the only thing I could do. I went to the chemist and bought a box of codeine. I didn't think I was being an idiot. I was a drug encyclopedia, right? So I did a chemical extraction. The real irony is neither of us even knew that as we spoke about how close I'd come to death and how it mustn't happen again, my liver was literally dying inside me. So hello, you wonderful citizens of planet Earth, and welcome to the next chapter. We were talking about overdoses, and we're about to talk about one of the worst weeks of my life. I need to give you a trigger warning for drug use, obviously, and if you want to catch up on the previous chapters, check out the playlist of all these stories, which is below. And I am jumping in here in editing mode to tell you that if you would like to read the written version of these stories as in a physical book or an ebook, that is about to finally land too. The first volume of these stories is about to land on Amazon. By the time you're seeing this, it may actually be live because it's going to be October the 1st for the ebook drop. You can pre-order it, and the physical copy of the book should land about then too. It's got a gorgeous cover. This is what the cover looks like. Oh my God. So what you're looking for is on Amazon. It's called Millennium Gothic by Dorian Bridges. But I think probably if you put in the Nostalgia Project, you'll probably also get it because that's the series title. People have been asking me for ages, when is the written version coming? When is it coming? And it's taken me so long to get this sorted, so I apologise for that. But it is about to be here, so happy October. And with that said, back to the video. And with all of that said, here comes the story of that messy, messy week in 2009. Rewind the tape. Here I am, blonde, anxious, and in the middle of a nervous breakdown, just about to make one colossally stupid fuck up. So, the overdose. People have a pretty solid picture in their head when you tell them you're a heroin user who OD'd and had to spend a week in hospital. It's a pretty fucking dramatic picture, but in my case, grim, grueling, and awful would be the words I would choose far more than dramatic. I remember trying to explain on social media after I got out of hospital and reported that I'd been absent due to an OD. Bear in mind, there was no internet on phones back in 2009. I had been off the grid for a week. Like, I'd been in a bad place. People knew that on social media. Then I just disappeared, went silent for a week. And obviously people were like, are you dead? Like, what's going on? I was like, no, I OD'd. And so I got back on social media and I said, it's not what you think. But no one got it. My closest heroin-using friend just face-palmed and said, shit, was it your mum who found you? That is bloody awful. That is my worst nightmare. And I had to explain, nope, it wasn't like that. Because the truth is, ODs come in all shapes and sizes, and like I've told you till I'm blue in the face, heroin was never the monster. Not for me. Heroin wasn't the culprit. In fact, if I'd just had some fucking heroin that day, everything would have been fine. The OD would never have happened at all. Confused? So are most people. Think I'm deluded? That too. We'll get there. So the run-up to all the drama was that I'd tried to force myself into the adult world too fast, too hard. New house, new area, new job, no dog, the whole thing. Aged just 24 and still undiagnosed with autism or ADHD. And the result was a giant nervous breakdown and this crippling fucking anxiety. And I mean crippling. It never ceased, never settled, never laid off me. It was like a panic attack 24/7 around the clock. I lost 15 pounds really, really quickly, even though I wasn't under eating. My metabolism was just so hyped by the constant panic. The weight fell off and I looked anorexic all over again. Then I didn't really know how to feel about that. I remember even the homeless heroin addicts I was scoring with back then commenting on it, peering at my back as we sat crouched on the curb waiting for the dealer's car and saying, Jesus, you really don't have a single ounce of body fat anywhere, do you? Or, look, man, have some of this wine you never eat. They're good people, a lot of them. That's the really tragic thing. Even though they knew I lived in a house, they realized at the heart of it I was just another fucked up addict with issues running down my core like a stick of Brighton rock. And generally they look after their own. Admittedly, being young and female helped. So I was this skinny little twig figure with my long blonde hair because I was still labouring under the delusion that I needed to be a responsible adult, even with this slip into heroin addiction. And that meant crushing out every single personality trait that was really mine. No hair dye, no silly clothes, no gothy music. I'd been shooting up morphine for a year, but had only really gotten hooked once the nervous breakdown started. I still had a bit of that morphine, but it was running so dangerously low, and that was why I'd had to switch to smack. There was one small but bright shining light in this whole clusterfuck as it rolled and gathered momentum, heading towards the inevitable awfulness of that OD. That bright spot was a guy called Roy. He was a needle exchange worker, ex-addict himself, like most of them are. I first met him back in 2006, actually, when I was still injecting speed. And I wouldn't even tell him my real name, not for years. He said I could give him any name I wanted in order to get clean needles, so I said Sonic. Because my hair was blue back then and I was wearing my spiky rucksack, so I felt like Sonic the Hedgehog. He said Sonica sounded cooler, so that was it. Sonica became my name when Roy was around. Once I realised needle exchanges were actually safe places, not like police sting traps, the way my paranoid speed freak brain had suspected, I'd chat to Roy a bit whenever I came in, and he became nearly a friend. Mostly it was just the usual stuff, you know, what are you using? How are your sites, meaning injection sites? Everything was always fine in my case, so they were jolly little chats, really, with Roy. But then the nervous breakdown happened. I swear I had a guardian angel looking over me about 2 weeks later when I went down to this new needle exchange for the first time, one that was bolted onto an addiction clinic. I got into that little detergent stinking room. You know the thing. If you've ever been an addict, all needle exchange places are identical, I swear. They have the same stink of detergent and alcohol wipes. And that stink really sets me buzzing on edge every time, always has. Because it's the smell that says, I'm about to get high. I'm about to get high. Though actually not everyone is, you know, you get a lot of steroid guys in there too getting their works. And it's a hilarious contrast between the skinny, twitchy junkies and these massive roided up bodybuilders. You generally get chatting in there if someone else is waiting too and they're clearly a user, not a steroid freak. Like, what's your poison? What's your thing? Have you had anything decent around here lately? That day, though, I was the only one standing there, twitching about impatiently, staring at the flyers on the wall, warning you about the dangers of drugs and addiction. Honestly, it's a sick fucking joke putting them there once you're already in the needle room with that smell that says, you're about to get so fucking high. And there's these flyers saying, yeah, you are, but you also might die. It's a head fuck, man, every time. Also, back in 2009, there'd been this really high-profile case where a lot of UK heroin got contaminated with anthrax. I shit you not, anthrax heroin in the UK. It wasn't deliberate. Someone had just buried some to hide it before selling it on, and it got contaminated. And they sold it and people died. Scary fucking shit. So anyway, I was in that room, heart pounding, nervous breakdown ongoing, reading all about anthrax heroin, worrying about the fact that I was using every day now. And that meant I was going to withdraw if I ever ran out, which scared me shitless. And right then, the door creaked open. And who the fuck do you think it was offering me the wares that day? It was Roy. I didn't even know he worked there, and seeing a familiar face was the first and last thing I fucking needed that day. Sonika, he said, as though I was his favourite person in the world, the way Roy always was. How's things going? And I just felt a bit completely. That was all it took back then in the middle of a nervous breakdown. I just couldn't do the neurotypical, fine, everything's fine thing like I do now, even if things are actually completely shit and I'm on the verge of topping myself. You know the game, we all play it. I'm okay. Is about the closest you can get to being honest, but this was Roy, and you could just tell he genuinely cared about everyone, genuinely wanted to know. So I just started sobbing, and he immediately broke all the rules, opened the security door right up, and ushered me through to the supplies room, out back into the drug treatment clinic, and into one of the big meeting rooms. I'm telling you this like it's all clear in my head, but it fucking isn't. I know it happened, but it may as well have happened to someone else. My memory is just a pothole that day. Sometimes I can find a pebble of truth, but mostly it's just a big dark nothing. I remember him asking what I was using, like, is it still the speed? I said no, not for ages. It's morphine now, heroin. And of course he tutted at me, told me off, but he knew it was inevitable, really. He was, I guess, in his 40s back then, Roy. Silver hair, tan, worked out a lot, really good-looking guy, warm smile, but at the same time, there was this ghost about him. Like, you could feel he'd really been through some shit. Like, when he was using, I'm pretty sure he was a monster truck of a user. You could just feel it somehow. This man has overcome some shit, lost a lot of friends, and beaten the odds just to be here at all. But anyway, I don't remember anything else. I was in that room with Roy. I finally told him my real name, and then I don't remember anything else. The next thing I know is that he did everything he could to get me sorted on a script, but those fuckers at the Pacific Treatment Center, they insisted on making me try Suboxone first. Now, respect to anyone who can handle that shit, and please don't let me put you off. It's a miracle cure for some, legitimately, but for me, shit. Suboxone contains an opiate blocker, so while you're on it, you can't get high. Doesn't matter what you take, it just won't work. Obviously, I didn't want that, but those Pacific fuckers refused to give me methadone until I'd tried subs. And subs, they were a disaster for me. I took one and was immediately so sober. The anxiety had me literally tearing my hair out. I had to get my stepdad to drive me right back to the Pacific Drug Center to sob my head off at anyone who'd listen. I was completely off it, couldn't handle that shit at all. So thank God they got a methadone script sorted really, really urgently. I don't even remember if it was the next day or what, but I got my methadone. Trouble is, it wasn't enough. It never fucking is in the UK. In the US, it seems like they dope you up to the eyeballs when they start you on a methadone script, or at least that's what I've heard. Tell me if I'm wrong. But over here, it's all about titration, and they give you barely anything to start with. So I was still mildly withdrawing, and it made the anxiety ramp up right through the fucking ceiling. I couldn't bear it, and that, right then, that was when I finally ran out of morphine. You know, the year's supply of morphine that this crazy American guy had sent me. Right then, I ran out. So I tried to get heroin. Of course I did. But the trouble was I was still new to the scene, and the only dealer I knew didn't trust me alone. My homeless friend wasn't picking up his damn phone, which meant the only way for me to score would be to go back into the city and find some strangers to score with, which I'd done before a couple of times, but I was losing my shit right then. I was too anxious to exist, let alone to go into the city and harass strangers to score with me. So I did the only thing I could do. I went to the chemist and bought a box of codeine. Do you see where this stupid fucking clusterfuck is going yet? Or are you one of the kids who wasn't an idiot amateur chemist? In this country, you can't buy pure codeine over the counter. It always comes with paracetamol in it. That's acetaminophen for you Americans. You know, that nasty over-the-counter painkiller that fries your liver if you take too much? Yeah? Well, that's what I had. I didn't think I was being an idiot. I didn't just neck the whole box knowing full well it'd be a disaster. No, not me. I thought I was being clever, didn't I? I thought I knew better than that. I was a drug encyclopedia, right? So I did a chemical extraction on the pills, and I'm obviously not talking you through the process, but basically I tried to separate the codeine I needed from the paracetamol I didn't. Only this process requires filtration, and we had no coffee filters. So my dumb, idiot, backwards ass used a tea towel. Yeah, you heard me right. I tried to filter out a lethal chemical using a motherfucking tea towel. Not even a good one. I'm talking an old, threadbare, holy-ass piece of shit tea towel. I could even see that it hadn't worked. The solution was cloudy when it ought to be clear. There were visibly bits of paracetamol floating in it. But I'd done these extractions before, tons of times, and I'd been absolutely fine. I just wasn't banking on the fact that now I was an actual heroin user. I had a tolerance. That meant I needed to take a full box of the stuff for the withdrawal to fade away. And when I drank that extracted liquid, unbeknownst to me, I was also drinking an entire box of poison. The first thing I felt, actually, was euphoria. I'd only been planning on getting buzzed enough to settle down my anxiety, then go score some heroin. But I ended up so completely fucked up on codeine, I couldn't raise a finger to go into the city. That was the first warning sign, apparently. The reason I got so fucked up was that my liver was being destroyed. The codeine came flooding through, totally unfiltered, and hit me like a ton of bricks because my liver was being fucking destroyed. I threw up that night, but I thought nothing of it beyond, damn, that codeine was weirdly strong. Next morning, I threw up some more. This is the dark, dark thing about a paracetamol overdose. It will kill you if you take enough. But do you know how long it takes to die? It takes 2 weeks. So if you ever fucking do this with the actual intention of taking your own life, you will be suffering in absolute agony for 2 straight weeks before it kills you. And there will be nothing anyone can do to save your life or reverse it. I reckon you'll have changed your mind by then, don't you? You'll be absolutely begging for a second chance at life. There'll be nothing anyone can do about that, and it is a horrible way to go. And acetaminophen overdose is brutal, especially if you don't seek help immediately. And of course I didn't. Why would I? I didn't even know I'd OD'd. So I got sicker and sicker that second day till I couldn't keep anything down at all. By the day after, I was really in a mess. Anyone could see it. We'd had to pull out the sofa bed so I could just lie there, regularly puking my guts up. But given everyone knew I was an addict on methadone by this point, everyone was telling me it was withdrawal. Just withdrawal, and I just had to get through it. Ash came over that day. He was coming anyway, and even though I was sick as a dog, he still came and just sat on the sofa bed and watched movies with me. I had to tell him about the heroin by then, didn't I? He knew I dabbled in a lot, way more than he ever had. He knew I used needles and morphine, had even let me do it in his house. But street heroin was a step too far, even for Ash. It actually made him cry. I'll never forget that. He just kept saying, "You could have died. You could have fucking died." And I could hear underscoring every word, "I can't lose you too. I can't." You know, like his dad. It wasn't heroin, his dad. Fuck no, it was a car crash. But he was only 17 when it happened. And I think something like that, it makes you terrified of death, of people walking out the door one random day, then just never coming back again. He wasn't stupid, Ash. He'd knocked drugs on the head years ago, and he read a lot of rock musician biographies. He knew how easy it is to die on heroin, especially using alone, the way I'd been doing. And me, being me, just kept telling him the usual junkie bullshit. I didn't die, though. I'm right here. I was careful. He wanted me to promise I'd never do it again. And I couldn't. Not even as sick as I was and believing it was all down to the gear, the withdrawal. I told him I'd try to stay away from it, but I reckon we both knew that was bullshit. The real irony is neither of us even knew that as we spoke about how close I'd come to death and how it mustn't happen again, my liver was literally dying inside me. And the reason I was sick as a dog wasn't this positive thing, this getting clean and moving on thing. It was the fact I fucking urgently needed to go to hospital and have my entire system flushed out. We didn't know. So Ash went home and my family went out, and then I got so sick I freaked out completely and called an ambulance. My heart was doing seriously weird shit inside my chest, and I was legitimately convinced I was dying. The paramedic came, and he was a lovely guy, but not the smartest. I told him everything, including the codeine extraction I'd done. I think I even told him I was a bit afraid I might have fucked it up. He should have cottoned on, but he flat out didn't. Just like everyone else, it was easier to see an anxious junkie in withdrawal who just needed reassurance and some hot fucking soup. But like I said, he was a lovely guy. He asked me, "How did someone like you get into this crap? You've got a good family, you're loved, you're intelligent. Why are you doing this to yourself?" My stepmom was there too by then. She'd raced round once an ambulance got called to calm me down, stop me overreacting. I told the guy I didn't fucking know why I did it. Heroin. I didn't know. Of course I didn't. No one had diagnosed me with autism or ADHD yet. No one knew that I was just bloody well self-medicating legitimate issues, though, to be honest, I'd argue that almost everyone who gets seriously into junk is self-medicating legitimate issues, telling them that drugs are their only problem and that if they just knock it on the head, they'll be 100% fine. That is a gross, ridiculous oversimplification of a massively complex problem. Anyway, I was in no state for that philosophical debate. So my stepmom and the paramedic got chatting about falling in with a bad crowd, the hazards of peer pressure, all that stuff. It was bullshit. I just sat there shaking and crying and throwing up. I remember this one thing, though. He asked me, that paramedic, what I wanted to do with my life. Like, really, what do you want to be doing instead of this shit? Doesn't look like you're having much fun, does it? And even though I didn't really know back then what job I wanted at all, and that was half the problem, when he asked me in that state, I blurted straight out, "Writer. I want to be a writer." And this not so bright, but legitimately lovely guy, he said, "Okay then, you're going to get this mess sorted, and I'm going to come back here in 2 years' time. You're going to be a writer by then. Deal?" He wasn't quite right on the time scale, but I got there eventually. I nodded, shivering all over, and we shook on it. Withdrawal was fucking miserable, I thought, but you met some decent people. I wish I could thank that guy now, even if he did get it all so horribly, horribly wrong. Because he left me at home, diagnosis 1 withdrawing addict having a panic attack. My stepmom got me to eat some yogurt. I threw it straight back up again and it tasted like hell. She's great in a crisis though, proper Jewish mother. They know how to do looking after sick kids better than anyone on earth, I reckon. My family came home, tucked me in, all that shit, but in the morning, I was convinced I was dying again. My heart was absolutely fucked. I hadn't been able to keep anything down in days. I couldn't stop shaking and my heart was fucked. I wanted to call another ambulance, but my mum wouldn't hear of it. They were still convinced I was just overreacting to withdrawal and it was my own damn fault. Half of that sentence was true, but not the bit that matters. They put me in the car and off we went to hospital. Turns out they shunt you through A&E pretty damn quick when you're puking everywhere and you've got chest pains. They blood tested me and immediately came to tell me my liver was more or less shot. I burst into tears, knowing immediately what I'd done. I told them about the codeine extraction, and they instantly got a drip into each of my arms, told me they needed to find a bed on the women's ward, and shortly after that, my parents had to go home for the night. After that, it was just me, all alone, on this horrible, hard, temporary recliner bed in this ghastly war zone between A&E and the wards. Everything was beeping. The sensory overload was hellish, and this was way before anyone had the internet on their phone. So isolation really was isolation. But more than that, the anxiety was excruciating. I'd started throwing up green bile by then, like proper exorcist-looking shit. I'd never felt so nauseous in my entire life. It was physically painful. The nausea was that intense. All I'd been able to do when my parents were there was repeat, "I feel so sick," over and over. Then I'd be gagging again. Sometimes I'd gag up everything in my stomach but still not be able to stop for about 3 minutes. It was literal hell. And whenever the gagging paused, the anxiety took over instead. I was too sick to read a book, too anxious to sleep, and the beeping monitors were driving me insane, and the groaning and moaning of the other patients was horrifying, and I was so alone, and I couldn't hack it in there. Could not. I knew I had to get out, whatever the cost. So first I phoned my mum, begged her to come back, break me out that I'd rather just take my chances at home, or at least have her there with me. "I can't be with you," she said. "The hospital won't let me." "Well, take me home then," I said, and she hung up the phone. So I called Ash, begged him to come and pick me up. "Ash, I'm getting a fucking taxi if you don't come, so please just come and get me out." He clearly didn't know what the fuck to do. Like I said, Ash never did what you needed. He always did what you wanted most in the world. But even he had to put his foot down in the end, especially after the whole heroin thing yesterday. He'd been confronted with the idea of losing me, and he couldn't hack that. There was no way he was endangering me now. "I can't," he said. "I just can't. Your parents would kill me, and you'd probably die. And what good would that do anyone? I'm sorry, I can't." Then he hung up the phone too. I think I screamed. A very burly female nurse came to sort me out. I told her I was checking myself out, AMA, getting a taxi, going home. "Then what?" she said. "Then at least I'll have my methadone tomorrow and I won't feel so bloody anxious." "You'll have methadone here," she said flatly. Poor woman probably hadn't slept in about 5 years the way they treat nurses in this country. "You'll have methadone here tomorrow." "I can't stand it here," I said. "I've got to have something. There's got to be some drugs at home somewhere. There's got to be something. Or..." "Look," she said, grabbing me by both shoulders and forcing me to sit back down on the bed. "You are just going to wind up back here in the same state or even worse, and then you won't even have a bed to lie on. There's no getting around this. You just have to go through it." With that, she marched off. She could see I was fucking stumped by her short, sharp shock logic. The idea of being here in this same awful state without even my shitty recliner bed, it was an unthinkable hell. It's really true, isn't it? Hell has circles, getting worse and worse. That nurse had made it blatantly fucking clear there was no escaping this one. So I curled up in a ball, tried not to tug on the stupid, annoying, creepy wires going into both of my arms, and I'd finally managed to start drifting off. When the bed began moving underneath me, I opened my eyes and we were off, a blurry form on each side of the bed spiriting me away to somewhere. It felt bizarre, like being royalty or something. There's nothing more surreal on this earth than being pushed about on a gigantic bed, wards whooshing past to the left and the right like little cellular universes. People dying, people being born, people suffering and screaming and sleeping, nurses awake 24/7, this bizarre fluorescent lit world where there's never really a night or a day. God, hospitals are weird. Spooky, yet comforting all at once. At last they wheeled me into this room with 4 beds, and it was dark and quiet in there. No beeping, none. They helped me off my shitty temporary bed and into a real one. A proper, flat, comfortable mattress and 2 pillows and a blanket bed. Got me some water and left me. I zonked out completely. That bed felt like some kind of actual heaven. I was woken at the butt crack of 5 a.m. by them taking blood out of me. That was to be a daily abhorrence. All I could think about was how big the needles were and how much they were damaging all my favourite veins. Would I even be able to use after this? Food was pretty much impossible. The stuff was vile, not that it would have mattered, because the nausea continued to be hellish. The throwing up was hellish, and now I'd added yet more horrible symptoms to the list. Nerve damage was one of them. I couldn't feel my legs half the time. It was eerie as fuck. I couldn't even tell what position they were in without sitting up and looking at my feet. If I was standing, my balance was utterly fucked because I was getting no nerve feedback. The other thing was the heightened sense of smell. Everything smelled vile, and I mean everything. The smell of my unscented lip balm was like rancid cooking fat. I could smell the hot diaper stench of the plastic lining in the beds. And when the meals came round, I had to get the curtains closed to block out some of the food stink and not to put everyone else off their meals by visibly throwing up bile right across the room from them. The boredom was nearly unbearable, and that made the anxiety even worse. There were literally no distractions. Like I said, there was no internet on phones back then, and I didn't own a laptop. I was completely off the grid. There was no TV, no radio even, not without walking further through the hospital than I had the strength or balance to manage. There were just books or magazines, and I was too sick to concentrate on a book. So I read endless reams of those absolute tat mags, you know, the ones with cover stories like, I had my granddad's deformed baby, or a 6-foot leech was removed from my colon. I was addicted to those mags hardcore. They're the only thing that got me through. Night times were creepy as shit in the hospital. I couldn't feel my legs, like I said, and I've always been an insomniac, so there was this weird spaced out nothingness to the dark of the room, like a sensory deprivation tank. I could see through the window to the nurse's station, just this little pane of grey light which made it all the weirder. People being awake and working out there while I was trying to sleep, it was like being in an airport overnight. Time doesn't really exist. When I slept, I had dreams about awful smells. That's how potent scents had become. The worst dream I had was about the colour yellow, this bile yellow shade, and the stench of it was so strong. I could hear it. I could feel it dripping on my skin. It was this bitter, rancid, gag-inducing flavour on my tongue. And even when I woke up, I couldn't get the stench out of my nose and my mouth and my memory Couldn't tell if I was awake or still dreaming. So I had to keep going out to the bathroom just to reorient myself, work out what was real and what wasn't. But hospital bathrooms are total creepsville at the best of times, let alone in the middle of the night when you can hear a pin drop. If you've ever seen that scene from The Vampire Diaries when Vicky's in hospital overnight having weird vampiric hallucinations, that scene flashes me back to 2009 every time. Hospitals at night seem to be a globally ubiquitous experience, a spooky, timeless, fluorescent-lit ghost town. Visiting times were the only good bit of the day. My family came every single day of that godforsaken 7 days. I never knew before then how important it is to visit someone in hospital every fucking day, but it really is. And I feel awful for anyone trapped in hospital with COVID going on and no visitors at all. Time just blurs without visitors, nothing to break it up, nothing to look forward to, just whiteness and nothingness. I was too sick to really speak much though, and I couldn't stand loud noises. I kept gesturing at everyone to talk more quietly. It hurt the volume. It's like a paracetamol overdose maxes out autism to a ridiculous degree. The smells, the sounds, the flickering lights, everything was an overload, and I didn't even know I had autism yet. In the daytimes when it wasn't visiting time, Roy came to visit me. 2 or 3 times he did it, using his status as a semi-medical worker to come in and sit with me. I told you he was a bright spot amidst all of it, didn't I? He was amazing, Roy. I haven't seen him in years, and I hope he's still doing okay. I'd love to thank him sometime for all of it, even if it was basically useless trying to save me from myself. I remember him asking me what I was going to do when I finally got out of here. My first answer was smoke some fucking weed so I can finally sleep. He sighed, tutted, told me he wouldn't even let me have that if it was up to him, and wasn't it better being in here, totally clean, just sticking to my script? I can't remember what I thought about that in that moment. I knew everyone would be watching me like a hawk when I got out, so the likelihood of getting any heroin was slim to none. But regardless, I'm pretty sure I was already strong in my conviction that heroin did not cause this, and in fact, heroin would have saved my life. If I'd had some, I'd still be at home, self-medicating comfortably, as usual. But I didn't, and they didn't give me enough methadone, and no one would give me any anti-anxiety meds, and that is what forced me to endanger myself with stupid shit like codeine. Maybe that sounds like wild, junky justification to you, and in the land of idealism, it is. It's stupid. I should have just sucked it up and handled my shit. But that wasn't the reality of me, of life, of many, many, many people. I was just too anxious to handle a fucking sock puppet, let alone my life. I stand by that logic to this day. If someone's in a desperate state, fucking medicate them and deal with the potential addiction issues later. Don't just leave them stranded to top themselves or nearly so. When will we start seeing mental health crises as actual emergencies? How many medical workers did I say that I wasn't okay, that this was going to happen, that I couldn't cope, that I needed something? I pleaded with doctor after doctor after doctor, and they just kept telling me I was a drug seeker and throwing me out the door. And it was obviously going to end in disaster. And if they were trying to save the NHS money, then clearly they failed, because I dare say that week in hospital cost a hell of a lot more than it would have done to just stick me on a slightly higher methadone script immediately or give me some diazepam. It was a clusterfuck. Speaking of the anxiety, even in the hospital, they wouldn't give me anything for it. They kept saying it was because my liver needed to heal. So they couldn't give me anything unnecessary. But they were perfectly happy to give me antiemetics and other stomach meds. Anything that was physical was necessary, but anything that was mental, unnecessary. They just didn't see the anxiety was real enough to bother with. It's fucking disgusting. The other disaster was that my mum had had all my possessions searched for drugs, and then every pill I possessed was taken off me, because she told the nurses I took too many pills, and given I was in there for an OD, they believed her. Trouble was, those pills were legitimate fucking prescription meds for all of my many eating disorder related stomach issues, and without them, by day 2 or 3, I was in fucking agony. Stomach full of battery acid, and the nurses giving me peppermint water was doing fuck all. I had to go and sit on the floor in front of the nurses' station and pitch a legitimate toddler tantrum before they got the sodding message that my stomach actually was wrecked, and yes, I did need those pills. I got re-prescribed every item on the list at great expense to the NHS, and it was a complete chore for everyone involved. Fuck's sake, Mum. Ash came to visit towards the end of the week, and he tried taking me down to the cafeteria, but the fluorescent lights down there were like a dizzying strobe to me. I was so hypersensitive to everything, and I still couldn't balance on my numb legs, so I totally ended up on the floor, at which point he had to help me back up to my boring old ward. I'm surprised I didn't get him to bring me weed and a wheelchair, to be honest, to escape outside for one little smoke that might actually have let me sleep through a full night. 'Cause I shit you not, that week in hospital is literally the only time in my adult life, the past 2 decades, that I have slept without weed, Nitol, or benzos, and it was a nightmare. But I was too sick to really kick up a fuss about it. The sleep deprivation couldn't make me feel any worse. I was already at maximum clusterfuck. After about 5 days, they were finally done flushing me out with IVs, which was a relief, even though I didn't feel a whole lot better. And they wouldn't let me leave until I'd seen a shrink. Now it was the weekend, I had to wait 2 more days of fucking boredom, sleep deprivation, and my blood being sucked out at 5 a.m. by those gruesome phlebotomy vampires. Everything was so spacey, I don't even remember what the shrink looked like when I finally saw them. That was the thing about a paracetamol overdose. Nothing quite seems real, except for the painfully exaggerated smells and sounds. Life was like one long, weird, sketchy acid trip. The shrink, whoever he or she was, asked if the overdose was deliberate, whether I was going to do it again. I explained the whole clusterfuck was a giant accident, promised not to do it again, and dodged a grippy sock vacation on the psych ward. Finally, I got to go home. I kept telling everyone how weird the world seemed, but I couldn't find the words to fully describe it. I was just so spaced out, and it was weeks before the feeling in my legs came back, which meant that if I put on shoes, I'd be stumbling all over the place because the distance from the ground was unexpected and wrong. But fortunately, the nerve damage, or whatever it was, did eventually heal. I can feel my legs just fine these days, thank God. Even after the horrible feelings went away, though, it only took a few sips of beer or any kind of liquor to bring it back. That's how screwed my liver was. It was about 6 months before that faded off and I could drink again, so thank God alcohol wasn't my problem or I'd almost certainly be dead. But after that, things rolled on. I started using again. Just a bit, then a bit more. And as we flowed into 2010, things were, well, the word that comes to my mind actually is heavenly. And how do I justify that in a single sentence? I guess to balance it out, I could tell you that when October rolled round, heaven turned to hell. I'd live that year all over again, would love to, but not October. Never that. For now, I'll just tell you, you don't fuck around with codeine. If you know what I'm talking about, if you're an amateur chemist too, and you think what you're doing is safe, please don't get cocky. Even if you do it by the book, this is what you're risking. Is it really worth it? That question's not rhetorical, by the way, but it's also not for me to answer. Your mental health is your own. What you're struggling with, what you're medicating away, I can never know. But I do know this. The health system does not support people with mental health and addiction issues well enough, nor in the right way. If I'd just been diagnosed with autism and ADHD when I was younger, I would have been supported, and most vitally, I would have been prescribed the dopamine-enhancing meds that almost certainly would have stopped me diving into addiction in the first place. I repeat, when will mental health crises be seen as genuine emergencies? When will we realize that prevention is better than cure? That an ambulance at the bottom of a cliff is fucking useless, and that is precisely what we do with mental health and addiction issues. I don't even know how much that hospital stay would have cost if I'd been in the US. The NHS is fantastic, a lifesaver, literally, but it doesn't give a shit about mental health patients. So when I ask you if what you're doing to self-medicate is worth it, it's not rhetorical. And if the answer is yes, then I understand. That's kind of the end of this chapter. But yeah, so, if you're doing something crazy to self-medicate your mental health issues because no one is taking you seriously, no one is listening to you, no one is diagnosing you, no one has diagnosed you, you're an adult undiagnosed, you know you've got something, you can't get the diagnosis, you can't get the meds, and you're doing some whack shit to self-medicate, and you know it could kill you, and when people ask you, is it worth it? I mean, the answer is generally no, it's not worth it, but there's no other answer. That's the situation I frequently find myself in to this day. This is what really frustrates me about all of this and about going back and thinking about this and looking at old pictures and things, is that this was 13 years ago, and so little has changed. In fact, things are probably worse when it comes to the mental health system. The next chapter's coming up. I would like to explain what I mean by 2010 being heavenly. I think a lot of us, we do have this curiosity, just like I did from a young age, about what hard drugs are like. And I think the only way you can really get through to younger people about, okay, but this is the truth of it, is to tell them the full truth and to say, look, here is the love affair at the beginning, but here is the consequences afterwards. And you've just got to hope that they keep listening for long enough to hear the consequences afterwards. But I would say, if you are curious about hard drugs and you've never tried them, but like me, you're young and you're curious, like I was, you're young and you're curious, I really recommend the channel on YouTube called Soft White Underbelly. They have a lot of interviews with drug users, and just seeing the state of them, like mentally, physically, the way they're living. Like, I find that, I wish that channel had been around when I'd been younger, and I could have seen this is what the reality is. This is not the glamorized view you're getting in books. You're going to spend more time in the agony of missing those drugs than you are in the bliss of actually enjoying them. Like, even if you only use for a year, you're probably going to spend at least 6 years in just pure agony of missing it. And it's like, is that worth it? Is that really worth it? But anyway, this was kind of a bleak waffle. But if you enjoyed any of this story time, there are story times that are a bit more jolly, relating to young love and teenage crushes and going out clubbing and my raver era and all of that. If you want to check out the playlist or become a wonderful Patreon person for $2. Oh, yes. And coming up soon, I will finally be telling you the Spain story. If you're someone who has been around my channel for a long time, periodically I get people on Instagram popping up and saying, hey, you still haven't told us the Spain story. You promised us it in about 2015, and we still haven't had the Spain story. And it's so wild to me that people remember me even saying that. But yes, the Spain story, I will be telling you about what happened with all of that. So if you fancy that, then you might want to subscribe or become a Patreon person or whatever, or just wait around and it will pop up soon enough. But anyway, this is a long waffle. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. I am going to shut up now. I hope you have a jolly day today. So I've run out. Bye-bye.